In this week's video, we're going to discuss calories during a deload week. Like, what do we do when we're cutting? What do we do when we're gaining? We have to deload. What should our calories look like? And then I'll jump into a few kind of rapid fire question and answer at the end of this. All right. But let's first discuss what the purpose of a deload is for. And I think that a deload kind of serves two main purposes. All right. So we got the whiteboard out this week. One purpose: drop fatigue. And you just wait. It's only a matter of time before I spell something totally wrong live on camera here, all right? And I'm not editing this stuff, so it's all stated for you guys. But the number one purpose, I think anyways, of a deload week is to drop fatigue. So we usually do that by decreasing our training volume. But we also have this other, or decreasing our training stress, which can be our training volume is kind of the main one. I cut that in half during a deload week. And then also our relative intensity, or how close we're training to failure. I usually keep that at 3 to 5 reps in reserve the entire deload week. All right. So one thing we can do to drop that fatigue is decreasing our training stress. But as you guys have probably experienced while you're in a dieting phase, dieting in of itself, did I say that right? I think so, is a little bit fatiguing, and our recovery resources are a little bit more limited when we're dieting. You know, we don't have as much food coming in, and we very likely would get a boost in recovery by eating, at least not in a deficit, during a deload phase, so we can drop that fatigue. All right. So by eating enough food and cutting our training stress, we can make sure we drop fatigue. All right. Now, a second goal of a deload week is maintain fitness. So what do I mean by fitness? Do I mean maintain our abs for Instagram? Well, you know, if you ever had abs for Instagram, I would definitely do that, but this guy definitely doesn't. So that's kind of what I mean. But in reality, I mean maintain our muscle mass, maintain our strength, and not take a step back in our overall fitness levels, okay? So we want to maintain our fitness as well. And I guess a third benefit that you could squeeze in here is sensitization? Question mark? I don't know if I spelled it right. But potentially deload serves as kind of a nice tool to potentially resensitize you to the training stress again, especially if you're finding, you know, that you are doing a lot of volume and maybe you're not getting good pumps and stuff like that. It might sensitize you to the training stress a little bit more. All right. So knowing the purpose of the deload, how should we approach a deload in terms of our nutrition for a fat loss phase and for a gaining phase? Well, these goals don't change. We still want to decrease fatigue, maintain fitness, and potentially resensitize ourselves a little bit. But I would say that by decreasing fatigue, we're going to get that sensitization. And it just looks like I tried to cross it out there. I meant to underline it, but by dropping our training volume, we probably get that sensitization. All right. But let's first cover a cutting phase. All right. And I'm going to do one of these to erase this. So what we're trying to hit those goals during a cutting phase. So what should our calories be? Well, to decrease fatigue, we probably don't want to be in a deficit to decrease fatigue. If we want to get the most out of our deload phase to drop those fatigue levels, we probably want to eat enough food to provide recovery resources and maintain our body weight. All right. So we probably don't want to be in a deficit for that. And on top of this, I also think that the second part of our purpose for a deload is to maintain our fitness levels, maintain that muscle mass. So if we're going to maintain our muscle mass, it's probably not the best idea to be in a calorie deficit here with decreased stimulus. So if our training stimulus is down, we probably don't want to be in a calorie deficit, because if we don't have that stimulus there to hang on to our muscle, there's a chance that we could lose some muscle. Now, are you going to lose muscle if you do 1 week of less training volume and a calorie deficit? Probably not. Like, I think that you would be fine. But even if there is a chance, plus we want to make sure that we drop that fatigue, then I don't think it's the best idea to be in a calorie deficit during a deload week. So that's why I typically do a deload with a diet break, maintenance calories during a fat loss phase. And you also get some psychological relief from doing that as well. All right. Now, there are situations to where, hey, maybe just the first kind of half of the week, I will have calories like in a calorie deficit for that deload week. Like if it's earlier on in a deficit and someone's feeling good, they just feel training fatigue, but not much diet fatigue, and they're feeling good, then hey, maybe we just do 3 or 4 days of maintenance calories in the back end of that deload, and that's enough. But most of the time, a full deload week works well, all right? Now, what about a gaining phase? So, our goal of a deload still applies. We still want to decrease that fatigue, maintain fitness, and potentially resensitize a bit. But during a gaining phase, what do we do with our calories? Still eating a surplus? Well, similar to a deficit, you have decreased training stimulus. So if your stimulus is down, and we already probably don't need much of a calorie surplus to grow muscle, I'm not sure how much sense it makes to be in a calorie or a calorie surplus when that stimulus is down. Now, someone might argue that, hey, during a gaining phase, there's some delayed muscle growth that could be going on, and you could very well still be growing during your deload phase. And you might not want to calorically choke yourself by bringing that surplus down. And I think that's a reasonable argument. And to me, that gives me the biggest rationale that the worst thing that you could do, the worst thing is probably a calorie deficit while you go through a deload week during a massing phase. Like, that's going to hamper recovery. There's a chance that you're going to calorically choke some of those gains that you might make. And I just think it's probably not the best idea. However, I think that maintenance still does the best job in these situations, because even if you shoot for maintenance, your activity might be down a little bit in this deload week because you're not training as much. So your energy expenditure could be down a little bit. Now, it might not be much at all, but it could be just a touch. So we might actually be in a very slight surplus in this. But I would say, while gaining, since our stimulus is a little bit lower here, we probably want to either maintain or like a super slight surplus. All right. So that's how I approach a deload while in a deficit and a surplus. But let's get to the rapid questions here. So one is systemic versus local fatigue. So you'll hear me kind of throw it out every now and then. Hey, this exercise causes a lot of systemic fatigue where maybe not a lot of local and that sort of thing. And basically all I mean by this is, and it's tough to put a finger on and it's not super scientific, but when I say local fatigue, I'm talking about fatigue in the muscle itself. So I'm talking about muscle fatigue. Like you do a bicep curl and your biceps get fatigued. And if you tried to do another bicep curl after you already just did a set to failure, you probably wouldn't be able to perform as well because that localized muscle is fatigued. But this systemic fatigue, by this, I'm talking about you just kind of feeling tired after a set. Like systemically, you're breathing hard, your heart rate's going, you have just built up some metabolites in your body, and it just feels like you are centrally taxed a little bit more. It's hard to describe this feeling in words, but it's like after you do a set of deadlifts, like sometimes it just feels like your entire body is tired rather than like just your hamstrings or just your glutes. So this, I would say, like whole body. All right. So local fatigue is just that single muscle you're targeting. Systemic is whole body. And there's probably good rationale to say that, hey, you probably want to maximize to some degree this local fatigue without a ton of systemic fatigue. Because if you do that, you might be able to kind of fill up each individual muscle group's MRV a little bit more, or maximum recoverable volume, and stimulate each specific muscle group a little bit more without hitting your systemic MRV, your entire body MRV. So if you have a lot of local stimulus, more local fatigue than systemic, you might be able to train each individual muscle a little bit more without kind of hitting that wall to where systemically you're just done. Like the session's over, you're packing up your bags, you're ready to go home. All right? So great question there. Question number 2, great question from Alex. I think he asked this a while ago, but YouTube is kind of a jackass with the comments, so I don't always see it. But he basically asked, ever decrease volume? And I just spelled volume with an A there. That's not how you spell volume, guys. That should be an O, all right? Decrease volume, but increase gains. So have I ever seen clients that have decreased volume, but increase their strength or hypertrophy? And 100% absolutely have seen this. I've seen it personally myself. And I think that this just goes back to the idea of, let me draw a nice little curve here. Of the volume and gains curve. And this probably goes down a little bit. So the whole idea is that we probably have a bell curve of gains to volume, to where the more volume we do, the more gains we get to a point, but then more volume is actually going to lead to less gains. And why might this be? Well, this is probably because there's a certain amount of volume or training stress that we just can't recover well from. And if we can't recover from it, then we're not going to adapt, because to have an adaptation take place, we must recover. Like Dr. James Hoffman, one of his favorite sayings of mine, words are hard, is recovery is required for adaptation. And if we're doing too much volume, we're probably just not adapting very well. All right? So absolutely, I've seen it in clients to where I've started them out like 10 sets per muscle per week. They were doing like 15 or 20 in the past, and they will tell me that, man, I don't feel drained in my training sessions anymore. My strength is actually a little bit better each session. I don't see drops in my performance. And then we see solid results over the long term by managing that volume. They don't feel demotivated in their training. Like, I think that's a good one. If you're always pulling yourself up to go to the gym and you're always a little bit beat up, that might be a sign you're doing too much. Now, as for strength, I think that we still have a nice little curve here of kind of the fitness and fatigue model. And I may have put these on the wrong axes. Axis? What's the axes? Axi? What's the plural form of axis? I have no idea. Sorry, guys. I'm not an English guy, I guess. But basically what we'll see here is fitness will go up throughout a mesocycle, but fatigue will also increase with our fitness levels. But then at some point, our fatigue levels here will rise to kind of mask the gains in fitness we'll see. So if this line here is our fitness might still be kind of going up here a little bit. But if this line is fatigue, it might eventually go above our fitness, and that might mask our gains in fitness that we're making. So our performance here, it might go up at first, but then kind of level off because our fatigue is masking our fitness levels or our strength, which is why a lot of kind of power lifters, they might decrease their volume for a peak week or something like that. Now there's controversy on whether that works or whether it doesn't, but I'll tell you one thing's for sure. If you're doing too much volume to where your fatigue levels are very high, you are very likely going to see either decreases in your training performance, or you're going to see your fatigue kind of masking your performance. Now, for hypertrophy, I don't think that this is actually a big deal. But I do think that after a deload week, after you decrease this fatigue, you wipe that away, then we should realize and we should see these gains in fitness that we make. All right? And over time, we should see those increases in our performance as we dissipate that fatigue in a deload week and we keep moving through our macro cycle, multiple mesocycles. All right, so absolutely, I definitely have seen that, but I've also seen it the other way, okay? I've definitely seen it to where, people, when they came to me, they were only training their delts with like 6 sets per week. And I'll be like, hey man, the delts, they tend to recover pretty well. They tend to do a little bit better on maybe a little bit more volume, and we've brought volume up and we've seen better gains. So I don't want you to think that this means that everyone is doing too much volume, because that's definitely not the case. But I absolutely have seen that decreasing that volume can help with muscle growth, and it's hard to measure muscle growth, but the proxies of muscle growth, I've seen better pumps, better strength, that sort of thing over the long run with managing that fatigue a little bit better. So great question there, Alex. I appreciate it, man. And the last question here is someone's like, I love doing OHP, but not for bodybuilding. Thoughts on doing OHP? So there's kind of the idea floating around there that the overhead press might not be the best bodybuilding movement because, if we're targeting our side delts and we want to grow our side delts, the OHP might not be great because it's a little bit more front delt, a little bit more triceps. And when you think about the overhead press, there's probably some spinal loading that you get on that. So there's maybe you get more systemic fatigue with the OHP, and maybe you get less of that local fatigue. So you get the systemic fatigue of the overhead press, but you don't get much growth in muscle groups that might be more important than like our front delts. Like we might get a lot of front delts with all of our pressing movements. So OHP might just add more systemic stress without a ton of local muscular stress. So that's kind of the argument against OHP. And I think it's valid. I do. I tend to not program OHP a ton. However, if someone comes to me and they're like, dude, I just really enjoy this movement. It motivates me to get stronger on this movement. I'm still going to program this exercise. Like it's still a good kind of mass builder of, you could get some of that upper chest, those upper fibers. You can get some front and side delt with it. And it's a decent tricep exercise too. So overall, it still carries quite a bit of stimulus with it. And I think that as long as you are managing your fatigue well and you take into consideration that maybe you can't do as much direct tricep volume because you're doing OHP, then yes, you can absolutely do it. Do I think it's the best exercise for most people doing physique stuff? Probably not. Like a lot of people want those cap shoulders, and I think that lateral raises have a better kind of stimulus to fatigue ratio. And, you can also train your triceps directly with better stimulus fatigue ratios, but if you like the exercise, I'm cool with it, all right? So that's all I've got for you this week. Let me know what you thought of this, and I'll, see you next Sunday. All right. Thanks for tuning in, guys. I appreciate it.